We oysters no longer remember how we came to know the story of a city that no longer exists. It was a city founded by a rich land dweller. He was an expert at predicting what people on the dry land wanted to buy and selling it to them. However, as the wealthy two-legged creature approached the end of its life, it began to dream of a city that could withstand the rising waters of the world. A city capable of inspiring new desires in its inhabitants, instead of satisfying what desires they already had. From its landlocked nest, the two-legged creature drew up plans for an ideal city based on all the things it knew about the complex longings of its own kind. As it scoured maps of the country, looking for a suitable location for the city, the creature computed the perfect conditions for the future development of humankind. All of its calculations pointed to the necessity of a fresh start under the creature's expert guidance. But no matter where the creature looked, it found no room for its expansive vision, until it noticed an ancient blue speck on a hilly lowland peninsula. We saw, or was it the two-legged land dweller who saw it first? Anyway, one of us saw that the fertile ground beneath the lake could realize its productive potential if the muddy waters of the lake were to be drained. Soon, machines belonging to the two-legged creature began pumping the nutrient-filled water out of the lake and into the already rising waters of the nearby bay, uncovering a muddy swampland that was to become a gleaming home of a new and better mankind. Somehow, we remember how full of optimism the land dweller was, as it gathered all of its employees in its headquarters. In the flowery language of its species, it implored them to join the next evolutionary stage of their kind. The creature asked those present to join it in building a city that would be a monument to their species' mastery of their own nature. We seem to have forgotten what happened then. Actually, we are unsure of how we came to know so much about what happened on dry land up to this point. Somehow, we remember that the enthusiastic response the old creature had expected never materialized. That very few of the two-legged agreed to relocate to the new city, and that when they arrived at the lake, they found a muddy building site instead of the gleaming new city they had been promised. As we lay gasping for air in the polluted waters on nearby oyster beds, the two-legged dreamer drove around on dry land, handing out colorful brochures promising a new and exciting future. I do not know how, since I have no ears, but we seem to recall all the impassioned speeches the creature held, asking other two-legged creatures to join in its new society. It even feels as if we observed how, every night, the creature redid the calculations that indicated the inevitable success of its endeavors. It is as if the disappointment of the creature was our own, as its words fell mostly on deaf ears. Instead of the rich and successful inhabitants that it had envisioned, the few creatures it did manage to sign up were poor and dispossessed. And even though we have no limbs, we remember how the creature's body ached as it returned bewildered and alone to the dry lake. Elsewhere, we oysters rejoiced as icebergs melted and the oceans rose, soaking the fields of dry land with salt water and flooding parched cities, destroying, along with the livelihoods of most land dwellers, the businesses of the rich land dweller who had dreamt of building a city. On the damp lake bottom, construction machinery and workers were swept away by torrential rains and flash floods. However, crowds of two-legged had begun to arrive at the muddy tent camps around the lake. Driven from their homes, they were looking for shelter and something or someone to believe in. At the edges of the lake,
Underpowered pumps struggled to keep out the rising waters of an angry ocean. The rest of the world might be drowning, but the city of the future finally had all the inhabitants its inventor could have ever wished for. Reinvigorated by the sudden influx of new citizens, the land dweller decided to open the city. It gathered a small group of land dwellers who had been with it from the start and instructed them to move into the city. While the straight roads and geometric buildings of the city already appeared to be ready for use, they were in fact still devoid of interiors or utilities. Until the city was complete, its new residents would have to pretend to manufacture, harvest, educate, party, play, and make love in front of unknowing crowds. Their job would be to inspire the crowds of ragged visitors to believe that a new and better world was still possible against all odds. Deep in the mud of the lake, we lay longing for the salt of the sea to return. The pumps struggled to keep the lake dry. The waters of the world rose, and the creature began to yearn for the salt of the sea. Instead of basking in the realization of his dreams, the creature found itself distracted by the sound of the waves on the nearby ocean. The relentless creature who had dreamt for so long of remaking himself and his race into something else began to dream of a quiet world beneath the waves of the ocean. As crowds gathered outside of the newly erected gates, the inhabitants, or performers, stood ready to play their assigned roles when the park opened. Dressed in gleaming pearlescent garments and washed clean of the filth of many years spent in the camps. Above them all, on the precipice of the largest pyramid, the two-legged land dweller walked, taking its last steps as a land dweller on its two ungainly legs. It had still not yet become part of us. Or perhaps we had not yet become part of it. Whichever is the case. Its mind became calm, like the deep ocean, as it thought its last independent thought. Its psyche melted into ours as its legs took root on the reflective surface of the building. Even though we have tried to recall many times, we no longer remember exactly what happened next. The days tend to blend into one another when you live hundreds of years rooted to the same spot, and the only things that change are the currents that wash over you. We remember seeing the ribbons being cut, and the crowd surging into the glow of pearlescent pyramids. But what comes next is unclear to me. Perhaps the dikes protecting the dry land were overcome as the poles gave back to the oceans what was originally theirs. Or widespread sexual intercourse with oysters had infected the inhabitants with a mutant strain of herpes that made them go mad. The sea salt washed over the city and land, reclaiming what was rightfully its. Just as we saw the land-dwelling dinosaurs perish as the land burnt so many millions of years ago. But the story of the two-legged creatures does not end here. When the tide is low, you can still see the oyster-encrusted tip of the largest pyramids. On our reef, between water and dry land, the pearlescent seaweed gleams in the rays of the hot sun. Below the surface, a regular architecture of oyster shells covers the geometric shapes of the original human city, as young oysters grow fast on the nutrients of human carcasses. The land dwellers that remain are no longer land dwellers. Just as I transitioned from two-legged creature to my present state. Many of my species stopped their relentless wandering and sprouted roots here, their hair slowly merging and hardening into shells as countless tides washed over them.
Their lives now consist of the simple, sensual pleasure of opening and closing their shells as warm tides wash invigorating phytoplankton over their gills. Forever entwined, we live on, between land and sea, in a city that was meant for someone else, but became our home.